information, but I have got an AI course that's going to be ready to go by the end of the year. Now, we are thinking about Python as a language that is probably most useful when it comes to machine learning and data, scientific stuff more generally. And so I wanted to just spend a moment, this evening going through the basics on functions, on variables and the like, because odds are many of you haven't actually, or never have actually programmed yourself. So I just want to start by really doing just that, okay? Let me go ahead on a computer. And on a computer, what you would start with is something typically called it's called a code editor. Now, on a program such as VS Code, which I'm just going to swat away and hide for now, this is usually a good popular program nowadays for actually writing code. So chances are you might have heard of this before, if either by other names like VS Code or Visual Studio Code, built by Microsoft, but open for all. It's something that you can download on your computer and start to write code up with. Now, you don't have to write code up with this particular tool. And in fact, all that we need at the end of the day is a so-called text editor, just a program for writing and editing text. And heck, like if you really want, you could even use Google Docs, you can pull up Microsoft Word, you can pull up a Word file if you want. You would have to save it, of course, in the right format. But really, at the end of the day, all that you need is a program for writing up text, because that's really what the code is. Code is just text. Okay. Now, with this particular program, VS Code, I'm going to have the ability to create one or more files via this little portion of my screen at the bottom. So if I were to lift this up for a moment and just drag some of these away, not too interested in what that has to say right now. But if I look at this later. Yeah, there's a lot of... I know this page is quite overwhelming at first, but really what you think of this is just being an interface between your computer, your kernel, so to speak, the core of your operating system, and your ability to make files with it. So this is what I'm going to call my terminal. Notice that this information that my C drive users marker, that's me and my computer, sitting at my terminal, as it were. That's no different to if I were doing this on my own CLI. So this is my terminal window, my command line interface, the CLI, to the underlying computer, And what I'm going to do is have it literally just type in the word code, if I just zoom in somewhat again, and then the name of the file after a space that I want to create. For example, if I wanted to make a file called hello, I do just such a thing. Okay. Now, as we'll soon see, like any program that you start to write in Python generally has a file name that ends with a .py at the end of it. That's just there to indicate to the computer that this is actually a program that's written up in Python. Okay, Python. Now, what you see at the top of my screen, if I just drag that down, I have this, press enter. And before long, there you go, I have this kind of blinking cursor, if you will. This little line there is by number one. Again, this is just number one. It just reminds me of the very first line of code that's going to go there, okay? And then there's going to be a tab which reminds me of the name of the file, so hello.py in this case. Now, without even knowing any Python at all, I'm going to write my very first program here as follows. I'm just going to say print hello world. And just so you actually see on my keyboard, some of those thoughts were actually finished up for me. If I was a little bit too quick there, but let's go back again. I only had to type in, for example, one parenthesis. And notice how that already closes up together. The other one just automatically appears, these two yellow parentheses. That's just one of the features that comes with tools like this, a Visual Studio Code editor, a code editor more generally, okay? Now, even if you've never programmed before, like odds are you can sort of infer, you can maybe kind of guess, what this simple program is ultimately going to do. And it's only going to have one line to my program, that's it. Print hello world. So as when I run the program, ultimately, it's just going to say hello to the world. And in fact, this is a very famous, perhaps canonical program, if you will. Something that we can write for almost any program, for the first one, for any language rather, which is what I've done here. Just announcing to the world that you're alive. So, but on my PC, on my phone, on my computer, I'm generally in the habit, like you, of running programs by double-clicking an icon or just tapping on the screen, perhaps. But I don't really see any icons here. Yeah, there's no way for me to any seemingly run this file. And in fact, that's because the interface, at least to my current PC, either that's to the cloud or to the, whatever thing I'm running on, is actually only a CLI, a command line interface, which even though it feels like a step back, from the menus and from the buttons, which are the icons that you and I seem to take for granted nowadays, you'll find that ultimately this is just a much more powerful interface to which, it's much more powerful amongst programmers in the real world for which they can get things going quickly. Okay, so for me to run that program, ultimately what I need to do is just say this. And yeah. So I'm going to have to use a command that I'm already familiar with. I'm going to have to move my cursor back to that bottom of my screen there. And where I previously run the command again, the command code, which had the effect of opening up a VS Code in my computer, then I pass in the name of that file I wanted to code up. Now I have the chance to type in a second command. This second command is, as you'll actually see, following the $ in a second. The $ itself doesn't actually indicate... well, it's not. So sometimes it's on Linux, it's a $ on Mac as well. Here in my case, it's just a little triangle, it's a little smiley face, little hat there. That doesn't necessarily mean that's part of my program, but in fact, if I just clear up shop for a second, what I wanted to do is actually start writing commands again here too. So I'm going to say Python of hello.py. Now I run that. Now, why is that? Why did I come up to? Well, it turns out that when I actually write code in Python, in a language like Python, it's of course going to be stored in a file, hello.py, which was the name of my file. But then I need to interpret that code from top to bottom, left to right, so that the computer actually knows what to do. So, at the end of the day, even if you don't really care about much about computers, even if you probably heard that computers only understand zeros and ones, the so-called binary system, well, that's the case, then something as, something that might say print, the English word print, and then parentheses, quote unquote, hello world, that's not ones and zeros exactly. Yeah, we somehow need to translate these kind of human words, if you will, into something that the computer itself can understand, ones and zeros. So we need to somehow translate binary code into a language that we understand. Now, fortunately, so long as you've installed a program in advance like this, well, there's a program as well as a language called Python. So Python is not just a language that we're going to write written code with. It's also a program. Python is a program, otherwise known as an interpreter, that in which case you're going to have to write up your own code with. Okay, this is something you can install again for free if you go online. You just search, download Python, and then you can find this online somehow or other. That interpreter then is going to somehow be handling the process of reading it from top to bottom, from left to right, and effectively translating it from those zeros and ones into a language that a computer is better equipped to understand, that executes Python code effectively from this. Yeah. All right, so from bytecode. So let's just go ahead and do that then. If I go back to my VS Code for a second. Now, I already typed out Python of hello.py, but I didn't actually get it to work properly. And that's because there's no file that actually exists yet. If I actually choose this, that's okay. And if I save the file initially, now it does appear as if it's okay. If I run the file again, Python of hello.py, again, calling the interpreter to then run this particular file program, it comes back with a result. Voila. Okay. So if you've typed exactly the same code and executed the same command, you will have written your very first program, in the case Python, which if you then take a step back and then consider what we've done, like what actually did we do to get it to where we are right now? To get to where we are looking on screen. Well, first and foremost, in most languages, you tend to have access to something that's called a function. And a function is, I'll send this over in chat, in fact, I don't mind. There you go. Cool. So what a function is in a programming language is it's a verb in a way. Okay. It's an action. It's a verb. It's something that lets you do something within that program. And generally speaking, like any language that comes with a predetermined set of functions, like some very basic actions or verbs that a computer will already know how to do for you, that the language, really will know how to do for you. And you, the programmer here, the human, the person in charge, you can use those functions at will to get the computer to do those things. Okay. So the programming question here was really simple. Of course, hello.py is using just one function, and if I highlight there, I can actually come back as such. You can perhaps guess from what it is. That function, of course, is going to be this print function. And this print function, if I hover over for a second, of course, it doesn't print any preordained string of text, which is to say, it prints out whatever it is that I wanted to print. And here too, we have another piece of terminology too in the world of programming, namely that of arguments. So an argument is something that we're going to pass to an input of a function. So it takes an argument, in this case, hello world, of the arguments that the print function takes. That somehow input, an argument is something that's going to be passed into a function which influences its behavior. Okay? So the people that invented Python, of course, they didn't necessarily know what you and I wanted to go and print on. So they wrote it in a way that, or they designed this print function so that these parentheses here in yellow, with the visibility, the ability then to take in as input some string of text, be it in English or some, whatever language I wanted to do. And then that's ultimately what I want where's my pen? The function to be able to print out on screen. So my function being this, and my argument, the thing that I'm passing in to the function, is what's going to be passed into these parentheses, okay? We pass them in, so to speak. Right, so what the program is ultimately going to do here is just printing, of course, yeah? It's going to show hello world, in my case, on screen. And that's generally known in programming as a side effect, whereas a side effect can take a bunch of different forms, be that something visual, be that something audio, be that something, in this case, it's something that appears on screen, and functions can bring about those side effects. So one of the things that they can do here is this verb, print, or this action, is to display on screen as a side effect, something like the words we want in hello world. Yeah, so, straightforward. And then my very first program, and I'm feeling pretty good from this. Everything worked like we planned, didn't make any mistakes, but honestly, when you're learning how to program, or even if you learn how to program once and you program again years later, you're going to make mistakes. And those mistakes, of course, are referred to a term that you might already know, which is that of a bug. Okay, so a bug is a mistake or a problem in a function in a computer that can take a lot of different forms because you can make a lot of different mistakes, right? And again, it takes some comfort in perhaps knowing that over the next coming weeks and months, you're going to make a lot of different mistakes. You're going to have a lot of different bugs in your code, and just like you and I still do, like these bugs are themselves just mistakes that are just problems for you and I to solve. Okay, so we're going to have a lot of different tools and via technical ones which you can then solve those problems with, but just don't get discouraged when writing a program for the first time. It doesn't even work that first time. It will with time, with practice, and again with experience too. So let me deliberately now go off and make a mistake. That there was a non-zero chance I might have done accidentally, already. I got lucky. But let me go ahead and just suppose that I forgot to include something like the closing parentheses here. If I zoom in for a second, at the end of the line, imagine my code editor hadn't done this for me, but I had forgotten to close up my thought. So that closing parenthesis looks a bit like this. And again, if I run this file one more time, so Python of hello.py, okay. So it's almost correct. Like it's 99% of the way correct. But now that I've, pointed out, it's pretty obvious that we're missing that close parenthesis, really. But even, seemingly minor details like that, things that you and I could actually humans wouldn't really care about. I would be fine if it just said, hello world and no need for something at the end. But again, if you're sending an email, a text message, or whatever, like it's just a typo. It's not really that big of a deal. But it's going to be a big deal to the computer, to the interpreter, because a computer is going to take you literally. Okay, and if you don't finish your thought all the way through, as the language expects, it's not necessarily going to run at all. Sure. So if I went ahead and do this, if I cleared my screen, if I pulled up my terminal window again, just so I can start fresh, and again, so I'm just going to run my file again, Python of hello, and this time when I hit enter, I'm going to see hello world, but then we have an error on the screen, the so-called syntax error, which refers to me having made a mistake on my keyboard. And this one, fortunately, is pretty straightforward. It actually tells me, one line up from that this open parenthesis here in red, it was never closed. And that's probably quite intuitive now that we are missing this closing space. And, now what I need to do, of course, I just need to close it. But unfortunately, those error messages, we'll see over the next couple of weeks and months, and they're not always going to be that user-friendly. Again, this thing comes with experience, with time, and, you will get better at debugging such programs. Okay, but let me make sure that I know how to, fix it properly. So close it up, save that up. And if I go again and run my file one more time, hit enter, and voila, we're back in business. Hello, world. Allow me just to forge on ahead here, but Ian, feel free if you want to, ask questions along the way, if only by chat or on the mic. I just want to consider now how there are ways that we might go about by improving this program. So how to make this program feel a little bit more interactive, just not assume that everyone in the world is going to be greeted as generically as hello world. Let's see if I can get this program to actually personalize it with something like hello Marco, or, hello David, hello Manuel, hello Ankel, or whatever, the actual user's name is. What I'm going to do is go back to my my file, hello.py. Now I'm going to add another line of code at the very top that simply says, so space, I'm going to say, I'm going to put it here, in fact. So print, what's your name? And I did forget one there. It's okay. So what I'm doing is I'm printing a line, my first line here, that's going to be asking the user for a question, for some input somehow. But now I actually need another function to actually get that input from the user. And perhaps, funny enough, Python does come with such a function. It's called input. That function is called input. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and call a function called input, which I'll just write here, input, open and close parenthesis like this. And then that's going to prompt the user with just, again, this blinking cursor, waiting for them to go ahead and type something in. Now, it turns out that, if you go to read the documentation, if you go to understand the input function, not so much there. I know that Python has been put on pause for a moment. I'm not too sure who usually runs this. I know, that's what I call him, Python Charlie, but not necessarily the case. I'm happy to lead those sessions myself, but just for the coming few weeks, I'm trying to get us in mind, sort of thinking more about AI and being equipped with the tools to do so. The way that maybe this is quite familiar to a lot of different people, I'm just going to go through the fundamentals first before we can flick over to something a bit more advanced, shall we say. Because again, a lot of these things are spent with kind of heads down practice with Python, especially if you go ahead and, turns out if you read the documentation for something like Python documentation for the input function, it actually takes in a couple of arguments. I wouldn't know how to quantify advanced necessarily, but I can do to the point of, like basic input outputs and, redirects and kind of test logics. And I'm not an expert. I'm holding my hand up to say I'm not the most versed, but I do know how to read it, shall we say, do some basic stuff. In as far as what I've already built up, I've just got a couple of handouts and some sheets like the one I just gave you. They're probably good for just sessions like today, but anything that you can then go off and do by yourself, I would absolutely recommend finding a more dedicated class to do Python. Well, Friday's a wild card. That's what this is all about. At least it said it was. But this is, a conversation I have on the top, and he just wants us to do a little bit more when it comes to being able to do the job, doing the things that actually underlie that. Go. So what we have then is a file as simple as this, that if I read the documentation, of which there are many, input such as this actually goes off and tells me it's going to accept, if I go to there, it would accept an input function, actually an argument itself. Yeah, so if the argument is present, I don't need to print it exclusively. I don't need to print it separately and then prompt the user for an input. So I can actually simplify this code a bit myself. Before we even use it, I'm just going to go ahead here and take some of that string off from the prints, and I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to put that in there, sort of get rid of the first print altogether. And in fact, that first print, would have gone ahead and just added a new line anyway. So now I've got myself a prompt where the user's cursor is going to end up blinking at the end of this line, asking, "What's your name?" Okay. So in my terminal window, if I go and save this file, Emmanuel. So that's the case. Python is free, and if even easier, let me give you a file that's like a Python code editor, of which there are many. This is one. So VS Code is the app I'm using to both use my CLI and actually interact with it this way. You don't necessarily have to do it the way I'm doing it. If you can, just type in your code, like here, for instance, if I say, input, what's your name? And then I'm going to say, print, hello world. That would then just run fine all the same on the output of the screen. Okay, no, it won't, because they don't like users accepting inputs. That's an issue that's happening with this particular file program. Again, online things, they're not happy. There was another one, I'm sure there was. Python interpreter. I know there's hundreds of them. Oh yeah, this one. That's better. So scratch what I sent you last. Again, like if you don't want to go through the effort of downloading VS Code locally, you can use an online editor just like this one. And that should be fine. That should work. Python org probably, imagine Python themselves or the organization behind them have their own IDE. So you're looking for an interactive development environment. Interactive, I can interact and both create and manage and delete files. And it's a development environment. So that figures. What I've got here is just another thing altogether, but more than welcome to just make one here, hello.py, and then call it like we were just doing before. So there are many. VS Code is just one such a program. In my terminal window on VS Code, or if you were doing this on the here, you still just can press the run button or F8 in that sense. This would be better. All right, so we're making some kind of progress. All right, it seems like that somehow is a new function. It's indeed prompting me, what's my name, for input. Now, I'm going to type in my name, Marco, M-A-R-C-O, press enter, and unfortunately, it doesn't really seem to do anything with my name. Yeah. Yeah, it'll be easy to say the things that you can't do with VS Code, if only because the amount of what this is ultimately is just a way to it's an interpreter and a compiler all in one. It understands bytecode, which is a kind of a wishy-washy middle in between the two. But needless to say that VS Code or other such editors like what's the other one? Oh my goodness, there's a few other ones there too. I can't remember. Like JetBrains has one. I don't really remember. I've used VS Code for so long now, I've forgotten. Mind blank. VS Code alternatives. I'm not here to tell you one's better than the other one. Atom is the one I was thinking of. Yeah, it's a little bit uglier. Eclipse, brackets. I've not heard of some of these. Sublime text I have heard, but they all do the same thing. Yeah, you can write to your file editor, and you can also have a terminal window inside of them. I just happen to like VS Code because it's kind of the unofficial best one. It is so well equipped nowadays with so many functions, so many people contributing to the program, be it with VS Code or other plugins, that you can actually have a much more feature-rich environment. So back to the file editor, which again, you don't necessarily have to use a VS Code for. You can do this online with I've seen people do it with like potatoes, with electricity vault and stuff. There's always a challenge to see how far you can abstract coding, and I'll let you to look into that if you want to. But this particular file here doesn't really give me any return argument. When I asked it, it asked me, what's my name? I kind of non-obviously gave my name back as an argument, hit enter, and it didn't seem to do anything back there. And that's maybe more simple if you understand from above. What I could do is actually go up to the second line and I could change maybe the world marker to, to Marco, go back to my terminal window, hit save, run one time, and if I just say, just run up here, perhaps that's also fine. Again, so what's my name? Marco, hit enter. All right, so now I'm up and running. Now my program is working as intended, but of course, it's not really working as we want it to, yeah? What we want it to do is not just pretend to be me all the time and actually be someone else. So if I'm going to be instead Dennis, for example, I'm going to say, hello Dennis, for example. I'm going to go hit enter. What's my name? Marco. It does return back Dennis. So of course, well, obviously not, because what I've done is I've hard coded that particular information. So what I've hard coded, I've literally written my name instead of that string. So we need some way actually to, instead of actually getting back whatever the user's input was. So taking whatever this initial function was and then doing something with it ultimately. For that, then we're going to use another feature of programming, specifically a feature of some functions, which is that of the return, right? Yeah. So, if you think of this as input, again, being this action of, or this verb, this function is like doing something, you can actually personify this as maybe a person, maybe like a friend of yours. You've asked a question off, and then maybe you asked your friend to go and get some input from someone else. Go and get that person their name. And if your friend comes back now knowing that person's name, like it's in my hand, well, wouldn't it be nice then if you could actually hand that name back to you? That's kind of metaphorically what we want the function to be able to do here, is to go off and get the user's input and then hand that back to you so that either programmer can do something with that. But it's not going to be handed back to me. I sort of kind of want to put it somewhere. I want to sort of have it in memory in some way that I can then print it back to screen. I need to do the equivalent then of taking out like a little piece of paper, just writing out my name on like a Post-it note or something. So that information lives in this Post-it note, write it down or something, and then I can feed this information back to my print function, my F. And then to do that, we're going to need, well, one more feature of this, namely that of variables. Yeah. Now, odds are, again, I think most people are familiar with variables from maybe like a math class, maybe from way back when, X and Y and Z and the like. Well, programming has this in some kind of in some way where the ability for you to go and create a variable. In the case of computer's memory, not just on a piece of on a Post-it note, on a piece of paper, this variable is able to store some value, some number, some text, even an image or a video or more. A variable is really just a container. It's just a thing, a place to go off and for some value inside of a computer or inside of your own program. Okay, so that would be my variable inside of which my value lives. If you can think of it this way, okay? My value lives inside of my variable, okay? Now, how do I go about by expressing this, myself in this way? To think that then, so what I think then is I'm going to introduce another variable that's a little bit more interesting named perhaps than just X, Y, or Z. What I could do is I could say X equals input, what's your name? I'll actually capitalize that just for legibility. But what I'm going to do is actually give it a better name, perhaps, than a typical maths variable, because I don't want to get too messy. And what I'm going to do here is just literally call it my variable name. I could call it name. Why? Well, again, in programming, I have a whole keyboard in front of me. I can use much more descriptive terms in order to describe ultimately what it is that I'm writing. Okay, and now, even though now variable here, this seems like an opportunity to consider a more specific piece of syntax. We've seen already our parentheses in yellow. We've already seen a couple of quotes again, which are again necessary when you're passing in inputs to a function. But this equal sign there, this is a new thing. This is in between the. Let's zoom in. This is actually in between. I'm going to write this down. That of the input function to the right. So that's my function, inside of which what's actually happening with this equal sign is I'm trying to get the thing that's on the right assigned to the thing that's on the left. Ultimately, the thing on the left is what's really important, the name in this case. Okay, technically, this isn't an equal sign per se. It doesn't mean equality in the sense that it actually means more like assignment. So it's not saying this, this is equals to this. So in Python, again, in many programming languages do this too, where you have a single equal sign from an assignment operator. And what this means specifically is that if you want to assign, again, from right to left to whatever the user's input is, so whatever you type in here, that information is ultimately going to be copied, because this equal sign is going to copy this information, this value, shall we say, is going to copy that value, and then whatever the return value is from this function that's here, that's then going to stored to the variable on the left. So again, this input function here, this input function, whoops, daisy, goes and gets the that goes and gets input from a user. So that's why I was able to type in my name at the bottom when I ran the file, or Dennis' name, or whoever. I could type whatever I wanted to. But it is also sort of behind the scenes that value, the return value, the thing that comes back from the function back to me as a programmer. And again, if I use this assignment operator, this equal sign, no matter what I call it, okay, I can then store whatever comes back here, and then just for persistence sakes, I can store that for longevity in the value of this variable here on the left, so that I can then reuse it later. Kind of overcomplicating it, but just means that right now, me sitting in the computer's memory somewhere, somehow, is maybe a container of sorts, a little box that contains the word Marco inside of it. Okay, quote unquote Marco. Whoops. Sure. So I kind of have a hunch to type this in then. All right, if I go in and type in hello name. Whoops. I'm kind of just juggling in the name of the variable. Well, what I wanted to do now is actually go ahead and run again Python hello.py, which if I now save up and then run, it's going to initially prompt me for my name. Why? Huh? Did I have something in the... Okay, there we go. So I don't know what happened, but it's going to prompt me again for my name. So what's my name? I'm going to go ahead and hit enter there. So M-A-R-C-O. But I haven't hit enter yet. And perhaps maybe via the chat, if what's going to go and happen on screen when I go and hit enter. I'm hoping that it says, hello, Marco. But any thoughts as to what it would be actually coming back? It'd be okay if it says hello world, but I don't actually want it to go and say what it's actually going to go and say, which is what David pointed out too. Yep, and that's what came back as. So it's probably going to go and say hello, literally hello name. Now, why did it say hello name? So it's not quite right, because again, I need another way for me to print out my return value. If just to do this one more time. So okay. So print, Python of hello.py. Now at that point, when I'm about to type in my name, what I would like it to do is sort of capture this information that either user typed in, store that, persist that in a value. Sorry, pardon me. The return value of which should be stored in a variable. I always get the two mixed up. They both start with a V. But the variable is the kind of container of sorts in which is the value. That return value, my name in this case, I'm kind of losing any use of it straight away, right? So what I want to do is have another way of printing out the value, inside of that variable, rather than this word here, just of name. And I can do this in a few different ways. Dennis has pointed out one definitely good one. If I try to do this as follows, like if I go ahead and maybe just redo this, because probably already getting pretty good at saying hello. So let's draw the line in the sand now and just say, all right, well, we've at least got hello out of the door. So hello, run Python of hello.py. What's my name? It at least says hello. Good. Now I want to go and print out this time, or just on a hunch this time, I'm going to try this. Print name. Now I'm going to print again, because again, you can use these functions as many times as you want. But now I'm going to pass in to that print function on line 3, the variable that we've deemed above name. But notice something a little bit clever now, because I'm not putting into double quotes like I did at line 1, because we've already seen that in double quotes. That literally means it's going to print out N-A-M-E. Okay? What I'm doing is I'm kind of getting rid of these these quotes, just in the hope then that now, by passing in this variable, I'm just going to write it out. It's a lot easier. Just by writing out this variable here that I've defined kind of above there, in the hopes now that by passing the variable to the name function, calling it, let's print it, if you will. This will in fact go about by printing the contents of that variable. So the contents of that variable is whatever, the so-called return value is. That's the return value that we get from that initial print function. So a little bit of kind of backwards logic, if you will, just to get to this point. But if I go in and run the same code one more time. So let's save this up. And I'll go and print the function or press play or whatever I want to. So what's my name? I'm going to say my name's Marco. Hit enter. And all right, okay. Now, it's not the best kind of program. Like I am sort of cutting some corners here, so to speak. I'm saying that, hello, Marco, on two separate lines. So it's not maybe as elegant as it's not pretty by any stretch. It's not grammatically appropriate English just to say kind of all in one breath, one line, and then, introduce another couple of ones down the line. But I just want to take a step back now and perhaps introduce a couple of other concepts that, which we should at least be familiar with, which is as our programs start to get a little bit longer and there's no, it's not just one or two lines anymore, but eventually our programs are going to become dozens of lines, maybe hundreds of lines down the line. We want to set the stage now for success moving forward. And it turns out then that in Python, well, a lot of languages do this too. They support this idea of something called a comment. Now, comments are ways for you to leave yourself notes in your code. You typically include comments by the way of a special symbol. In Python, that's going to be a hash symbol. You can see that as a kind of hashtag there too, typically. And then that allows you then off to go off and write the equivalent of a note to yourself, but in such a way that it's not going to break your code. The computer actually ignores your comment. It's just there for you. This is just there for your teacher, just there for your colleague, someone that's going to have a look at your, someone that you're ultimately sharing that code with. So that if I go back to my VS Code here for a second, I just want to add a couple more comments to my program, just, to explain it to myself, maybe down the line, or just other people, what my program is ultimately doing, in the hopes that it makes it a bit clearer to read. So let's go ahead and type that. So what I'm going to do is at the very top of my program is, so on line 1 now, I'm just going to move that original line down one bit, and then I'm going to add, clear this up, I'm going to add a hash. So that's this thing right there. Notice it is a different color already. And what I'm going to say is, why don't you ask the user for their name? Something like this. Now, I don't have to use that language. I could say this in Spanish. I don't have to use this text. I could use whatever I wanted to. It doesn't have to be in English is what my point is. But I'm going to do this for now, just because below that, I want to go ahead and say something like this. So say hello back to the user. Now you'll notice, by the way, VS Code by default is kind of graying out. At least in my font is green, but it's another color. My comments have been grayed out. They're no longer white. They're no longer red. They're kind of green. And that's because these are notes to myself and the computer, ultimately, that is going to be ignored. It's going to be ignored, okay? But now what we have is we have two comments. One is going to ask the user again for input, and then the second comment again say hello to the user. And I kind of commented out each chunk of code, like each lines of plural of code, and then they're doing something noteworthy. Why am I doing this? What is the purpose, perhaps, of having, my kind of code blocks commented out, if you will? Any intuition as to why this is a good practice to have these lines kind of awkwardly dangling about without adding anything necessarily to my code's function? But what is the purpose, perhaps? Exactly. Yeah, straightforward. So Davis points out, tomorrow morning, I'll wake up after having slept for some time and forgotten what it is I did the previous day. It's then more convenient, as David says, just to have comments in, just to see in English or some other language what the program's actually doing, so that you don't have to go off and read the code again. Or better yet, like if there's a mistake down the line, you can actually, you can now read what your intention was. And then you can go back and look at the code and figure out what it is that your code was doing without, what you intended. So this isn't necessary for the program to be there. Again, for a program this small, again, it's pretty obvious even with just 1 or 2 lines of code, 3 lines of code, what this program is doing. But it's just as fast to read the code in the comments. Again, getting the habit is what I'm trying to get you into. Generally a good thing here to comment out your code, every 1 or 2 different lines, just to remind yourself, just to remind others what your code or your intent is and what your code is actually doing. And you'll even see this kind of dotted out here throughout. Now, what's nice about these comments too is that they also can serve as a sort of to-do list, if you will. There's this notion of programming that's known as pseudocode. Pseudocode isn't a formal thing. It's not a specific language. You're not going to find a book on this. It's just using English or your own language just to express yourself more succinctly, just more methodically, more algorithmically, so to speak. But pseudocode, therefore, because it's not actually Python and it's not necessarily English either, it just kind of allows you then to outline your program, even sometimes in advance. So for instance, if I go back to my, if I wasn't quite sure how I wanted to go about by writing my program, but I did know what I wanted to do, I could have just started today by writing something like this. Yeah. So I could have started by just knowing the method of, I know I need to ask them for their name and then say hello back. Again, there's no code in this. I could have just written out a couple more comments again further down, just step 1, step 2, step 3. And then once I've outlined my code, my pseudocode, actually, I'm kind of interested. Amazon Q is prompting up all the time. How do I get that going again? I'm just going to go and cheat and get Amazon Q. Oh my goodness. Is it because I'm not signed in? I am. There we are. So can you write me some pseudocode in comments for a program which accepts input from a user and as their name and greets and let's say give them personalized greeting. Now, okay, so if Amazon Q is new to you, this is Amazon's latest toy that has been kind of rolling out with the Gen AI features. You have the developer AI and the business AI plan. The developer AI plan is free. Anyone can use this. It's just a case of downloading against your VS Code. Another reason why you would use such a program instead of just a text editor. One of the things it can do is realize with human language as a large language model, the code that it wants you to, well, you want it to spell out something and it will go ahead and do that for you. For some reason or other, it's not doing it quite the way I like it to, but well, it's kind of doing it. It's not entirely what I was going for, but there is okay, so an awful lot in terms of it's using Claude Sonnet 4, but I'm going to replace. How do I do that? There used to be a button I can just click and it'll oh, maybe I misclicked it. I don't know. Like, obviously, I can just copy this. I can copy and paste it in. I'm not going to do that because this is clearly a lot more. It's not quite the form I was going for. But I'll leave that with you to check out in a bit. What I'm going for though is really just a simple program, which is going to go in and say, all right, well, I now know what to do. I know now what can I do to go and ask them for the name. Okay, so well, what I can do is I can get the input function for what's your name, and then again on the left here, maybe I can put a little variable there, such as name, and then assign what's your name. Whatever return value comes back is going to be assigned to that variable that's stored here in the name. Okay. Then how do I say hello to the user? Well, I know that I can use these print signs to go and say things on the screen. So let me go and say that then. For example, let me go and print out the hello and print out. This is kind of annoying me. It's getting in the way. Q print and then just the name itself. So again, the pseudocode there is a nice way of structuring your to-do list, especially if you have no idea how to kind of write the code out initially, because it breaks down the bigger program into more bite-sized tasks. Okay. Okay. I hope this is at least bringing true or interesting to those that perhaps want to get a little bit of experience, at least the basics of core programming, so that when it comes to doing it, you at least are familiar with at least the primed, you've been primed in such a way. For those that maybe have seen it before, I'm aware that this will be really basic for, just to go back to basics, but all the more worthwhile to then spend time developing on those set applications. Right, if I will just forge on ahead here, if you don't mind, I just wanted to come back and, as I said, I wanted to think about ways of making my program improve, how to make it further, how to also introduce a couple of other new features which might then go off and take into account over time. So it turns out that we can actually improve our application, certainly because it's a little bit disappointing, that I'm cutting this code and now I'm saying, hello, comma, and then on a new line, printing out my name. Like, we can do better than this, and I want to. Most programs that you use on your phone and your laptop, they certainly, they keep text together, so when people want them to. So how can we go about by doing that? There's a few different ways again for this too. And in fact, the goal here is maybe not so much to solve this problem, one way, but just to demonstrate and to emphasize that in programming, Python and other languages too, there's always, there's so many different ways to solve the same problem. And here's such a way to do just that. I want to then put them together so that if I go back to this, let me just go here. Now, instead of just saying print and then say hello, I want to add that actually onto the very end of that line of text, the one with the user's name in the story. Here we go. Like this. All right, so I'm kind of using this plus in an interesting way. This is not addition per se. Like, I'm not adding numbers, obviously. I do want to kind of maybe add that person's name to the string of text that that hello, comma has come about with. Let me go ahead and just back again to my terminal window. If I press save and then run, enter. All right, so what's my name? I'm going to go ahead and type in Marco, enter, and well, it's better yet. Okay, it's better. It's okay. But there is a minor bug even then, okay? And this one's more aesthetic. Yeah, clearly there's a missing space. 2 times over, in fact. Let me just go ahead and add some intuition, maybe. So where perhaps would be a good place to go and space myself through? So what line do you think I should add a space onto? So if I'm what I'm saying is that this is a little bit of an ugly kind of all-in-one as well as this. Where do you think I should probably, what's your intuition? Where should I put my space, do you think? I reckon that
inside the quotes on number 2, line 2.
Okay, inside the quotes, yeah.
At the end, you got name twice as well.
Okay, doke. Oh yeah, true. Didn't see that one. Good. And I'll just say that at the bottom as well too. So I would argue down here. Sure. All right. Yeah. Enter. Let's run that one more time. Now, okay, so straight away, there you go. I have something that looks a little bit pretty in terms of, English grammar and asking me something. Hello, and then space, marker like that. Perfect. Now, again, if you rewind, then you might have noticed that, like you wondered before, like, why did I have the seemingly extra space at the end of my question mark? Why did that come about here? This is because it's not immediately next to the same question mark there. There's actually other ways that we can do this. It turns out that there are many, many functions, print amongst them, that can go on and take multiple arguments. It turns out then that if I separate the inputs to a function, the so-called arguments to a function, with a comma, I can not just pass in 1, but 2 or 3 or 4 or, many more, and so forth and so forth. So if I now say, hello, comma, name, if I go ahead and actually just pass in that first hello, comma, space, and then, followed by not plus anymore, but followed by then just the name itself, whoa. That's Q trying to be helpful there, but let me just get rid of that. This is a little bit confusing the potential because at first glance now it seems like I've got 2 commas, 1 and 2, but just note that the first comma, this one in orange, that's inside of my quotation marks, which is simply just an English grammatical thing. Yeah, this is part of a string. This second comma, the one in white, that's outside the quotes and between what are now 2 separate arguments to the print function itself. So the first argument is going to be hello, comma, second argument, her name. Okay, just to see how this looks then, if I, one more time, say Python of hello.py, press enter, what's my name? Marco, enter OK. Okay, so I've kind of overcorrected myself there too, because now I've got two spaces for some reason. Well, it turns out, and this is actually quite subtle, so when you pass in multiple arguments to print, it automatically inserts a space for you. Now, this is not that relevant earlier when I was passing one big argument to print, all by itself with that plus operator. This time, because I'm passing in, because of that comma, after the other, so I don't actually want that extra space down here. I don't need to pass one in myself, so I can just do that. And notice that if I run the program again, save, run again. What's my name? Now it looks ideally a little bit more grammatical the way I want. Where did that work? Oh, let me just delete that there. There you go. So my name is Marco. All right, fine, sure. Now, which of these approaches is better? I think this one, because at least it uses a function print with two arguments, hello and name, separated by a comma, the variable name. The previous version before, remember, that's the one where I had not the comma, but actually technically just one argument, even though it looked like this. Well, it's one argument in the sense that the computer, like literally like in maths, is going to do whatever's inside the parenthesis first. So if inside the parenthesis you have this string of text, okay, hello, comma, and then a space, like that, and then you have a plus, which again doesn't mean addition per se, but concatenation. To concat something means to join the two things, well, join the thing on the left with whatever the thing is on the right, kind of glue them together, which ultimately becomes, one longer English phrase, hello, comma, space, my name. And then what's really being passed back ultimately to the function print is technically something like this, okay? But it's all doing that dynamically, kind of on the runtime. And it's not me typing in Marco specifically, as I discreetly did earlier. It's the program figuring itself out that the value is going to be concatenating hello with the value of the name and then passing that ultimately to the print as the sole argument. Okay? Right, let me just come back there to the coding question and just see if I can show you a couple of other ways to solve the same problem. Okay, so along with emphasizing that what we're technically talking about here is just strings, yeah? So strings are, like this, but there's actually a more technical term for strings themselves, and that's just str in Python. So str for string for short. And as you may, if you program before in other languages, people who invented programming, they try to be very succinct, to the point, so that when people use very fairly short phrases to describe things, not necessarily use all the words like string, because life's too short. So while you may say string, like technically in Python, what we're talking about is actually those sequences of text, technically strs. That's actually a type of data in Python. So we'll soon see that there are other types of data types in other programs as well. In fact, let's see if we can improve on this another way. So I like the progress we made so far by keeping everything on the same line, like this, hello, Marco, all on the same line. But what more then could we do in terms of solving this problem? Now, it turns out then that we don't actually have to give up entirely on using print twice. So let me just rewind a little bit earlier to when I had it looking something more like this. Okay, print, and then just the name itself. So remember, this is when I wasn't really too sure on how to solve the problem, so I was just using the print function 2 times on line 5 and 6, just to print out the word hello, and then the space, and then the comma, and then I was using the print again to print out the name. I mean, that strictly speaking wasn't bad, and it was just a little bit ugly when it comes to running 2 separate lines of text separately from one another, but there's another way to fix this. Clearly, it seems then on the case that this print function here is automatically outputting a blank line, because it's moving the cursor sort of automatically for me to the next line, because that's why I'm seeing hello in one world. If I save this up, Python of hello.py. So it must be somehow moving it to the next line, yeah? Because that's why I'm seeing hello here, and Marco the next one on this prompt, okay? On the one beneath that too. So print seems to be presuming automatically that you want it to move the cursor to the next line, kind of the line beneath that, after you pass in some argument. But again, you can override this behavior. Again, functions, all they do is just take in arguments which influence the behavior. You just kind of need to know what those arguments are to begin with. And it turns out then that if we kind of look at the documentation one more time for the print function, where was I? Close it up. Print function in Python. This is where we can actually look at the, it's a URL where all the information is. I'll just go to the official one. So built-in functions, again, a part of downloading that package called Python is you're getting all these, out-the-box functions that work, shall we say. So this is where all the official documentation lies. If I go around and poke about on specifically print, there we go. I want to find all the available functions that the Python might look like. And again, if I look a bit more precisely, I can find this particular documentation for that particular print function itself. And again, rather than just putting this up in the browser, I did have that earlier in this. So I'm going to go and find that highlight, that same one from the same URL, just to not kind of squeeze too much on screen. There you go. So this perhaps is easily the most cryptic thing we've seen yet. But this is, again, from the official documentation. If you went to that URL and you could see that big, long, like this line here, this is one of the best things that you can do when beginning to learn a language, is honestly just learn how to read the documentation. Because honestly, like, truly, all the answers to your questions will be in here in some shape or form, even though admittedly it's not always obvious. And I will say too that Python's documentation isn't necessarily the easiest thing to navigate for, especially, first time novice programmers. Just takes practice again. So try not to get overwhelmed if you're not too sure what you're looking at, okay? But let me just walk you through this example then. What I'm saying is that this is a line from that text from the official documentation for the print function. And what this indicates is the name of the function, Okay, so print is the name of the function, of course, print. And then we've got the parenthesis opening up and closing up too. So way over there. Everything that's inside of this parenthesis is the arguments. Those are the arguments that, or the potential arguments that can be passed into the function. However, when we're looking at these arguments in the documentation like this, there's technically a different term that I would use for this. These are technically not called arguments, but parameters to the function. So just to be clear, when you are talking about what you can pass to a function and what those inputs are called, they're parameters. But when you actually use the function and you pass in values inside this parentheses, those values are called arguments. Again, just two different sides of the same coin. Arguments versus parameters. So we're talking about the exact same thing. Parameters are the variables defined in the function's declaration, acting as placeholders for the expected input. Arguments are the actual values that are passed in when it's called, when it's runtime, okay? So in terms from when you're looking at the problem from different directions. So when you're looking at the function, what can the function take versus what you're actually passing into the function? Now, what does that imply? Well, it's a little bit cryptic, but if we have a go at it, at the moment, just know that this asterisk, as you will come across in many places in policies and the like, this is a star, and then the word objects. That just means that the print function can take in any number, like an infinite amount of objects, and I can pass in, 0 strings of text, like the one I just did before, 2 strings of text, or technically like infinite amounts of things, as I really want to, but that code's not going to look very good. So after which, we then see a comma, and then we see another parameter here, just kind of for another color sex. This one is called SCP, which is short for the English word of separator. Separate, like that in English. Notice though, with separator, you've got yourself an equal sign. This equal sign here in this. Then quote unquote single space. Yeah, there's a space in between. So space, I don't know what that is yet, but I think we've seen a hint about this. Okay, let's just focus on this then. Okay, so the print function that takes then another argument. I'll just just to tie it up. Okay, another argument called end, and the default value for which one is apparently based on this equal sign and those quotes forward /n. Now, if you'd like to go and tell me, what do you hazard a guess what /n might be? If you'd like to chime in, anyone who's programmed before has probably seen this in some shape or form. Perhaps not as cryptic looking as this, but any guess, any intuition as to what /n might be? Exactly, yeah, Manuel. It breaks to the next, it means new line. So that's actually a way of textually indicating that if and when you want the computer effectively to move the cursor to the next line to create a new line. And so technically, like again, if you go to the documentation, you'll see much more detail on this, that there's a parameter then for this called end in the documentation, which for the print function, if I go back to it somewhere here, you don't literally see /n, you see a new line, yeah? You see the cursor then moving to the new line. So by that logic here, let's move backwards. So SCP, separator for, this, the default value for separator is apparently a single blank space. Well, where have we seen that before? Well, recall like in the early example when I passed in not just one, but 2 arguments to the print function, remember that they just magically had a space between them? And in fact, like they then had the space plus my own space, which is why I deleted my space because at that point it was extra, I had 2 instead of 1. So this just means then that when you pass in multiple arguments to print the function, they're going to be separated by a single space. So by default, when you pass arguments to print, the whole thing is going to be ended by a new line. Right then. So now, just I think by knowing this, let me literally just wave my hand at the rest of the documentation for another day. There's more things that print can do, but we're just going to focus on entirely sep and on end. And see if we can use that just to solve the original problem. Okay? So the original problem was this. I don't know how hello and Marco are in 2 different lines. And that's happening again because print is automatically printing out a new line. So let's tell it not to do that. So let's do it by, again, passing the second argument to the first one, to the first use of print rather, to say end, quote unquote, like that. Okay, and that is the default automatically. What's it? Oh, there we go. Just to make it quote unquote, nothing else. So what I'm doing here is I'm overriding that default value, the default value here, so that there's no new line, which I'm trying to get rid of. Okay, there's literally nothing there. And let's see what happens. Save this up, go down to my terminal window again, clear it up. I'm going to run python of hello.py, press enter, type in my name, and I think now everything's going to stay on the same line. Because again, this line here, line number 5, that's going to go ahead and print out hello, comma, space, but then nothing at the end of that because, again, I changed it to be quote unquote nothing. So the second line is then going to print out the name Marco, or whatever like I typed in the human is, and then that's going to move the cursor back to the next line because I didn't override the value of the end there. That's why I have this little problem there too. Yeah? Just to see this more explicitly, if you do something again like this, well, I have no idea what's going on, okay? Let me just temporarily put 3 question marks in there. Let's kind of to see the results of this as well. Run this one more time. Let me just go back to terminal window. I press up, by the way, just to rerun the previously run command. Enter, what's your name? And then now I'm going to see literally, well, really ugly output, but hello, space. And then you literally see what's going on here. So hello, comma, just to zoom in somewhat, make that a bit clearer for you. Yeah, so hello, comma, space, and then those 3 question marks end, and then that print statement. So we have it, okay, MELCO, not a good outcome, but it demonstrates again how much control we have over this too. So let me just rewind that further then. If I get rid of this, there we go. So remember that in my, what am I doing then? I have another version of this. Yeah. Okay, so when I passed in hello, comma, and then my name, they were separated by a single space. So Python of hello.py, and then my name, that just kind of worked. But I'm going to now say name. What about if I overwrite the value of separator from before and just use SEP for short, okay? So instead of just being one big space, actually, I'll keep the question marks there too. We could do something a bit like this, where like question mark, just to wrap my mind around what's going on there. So let me just go and save that up, reintroduce the code editor. So Python, hello.py, press enter, and then what's my theme? Yeah, there we go. So what I can see there is, I can see there's two inputs. So hello, the comma, and then the name. They're separated kind of in an ugly way by those 3 question marks because I've kind of, I've overwritten that default behavior of the separator. And even though documentation like uses single quotes here, you can see in single quotes. I've been in the habit of just, using double quotes. You can use either in Python. That's not, strictly speaking, it doesn't matter, but you should be consistent. Just always try to use one or the other, okay? I'll just keep an eye on any questions on this so far. But in the meantime, if I forge on ahead, that just to give this thing an official name, because up until now, what we've been passing in as values to print, these are so-called positional parameters. Like positional parameters, they're positional in the sense that, the first thing that you're going to get to pass to print gets printed out first. And then the second thing you get to print out is the second and so on. So those are named parameters because one, they're optional and, you can pass them in at the end of your print statement if you want to, but you can't use them by their name. And this might be a weird question, but I was wondering, what if someone actually wants to add quotation marks within the quotation marks? Like what is, if in this corner case here, like, what if like this is all sounding great, at least in the programming sense, but wait a minute, like what if you want to print a quote, like in a book or something? So let's see if we can figure this out, okay? So if I go back to this, I'm going to temporarily just comment out everything else, just to not lose everything, okay? I'm going to say print hello, and I'm going to say, suppose I don't want to just put their user's name in, but, like, let me simplify this further. I want to just, maybe if I'm being a bit sarcastic and I want to say, friend in kind of quote marks, in that kind of tone, well, that's not going to work because, what I'm trying to do there is actually use quotes to be like your friend in finger quotes, but you're actually going to end the sentence right there and then. And again, if I try running this one, so if I do this, Python effect, just again, you'll perhaps annoy, the syntax at the bottom. I've got this invalid syntax at the bottom. Yeah. So perhaps we forgot a comma, but, this is actually a bit worse because sometimes the error messages don't, you see, are a bit misleading, perhaps. It's kind of all over the place. Like the compiler, the language doesn't actually really know what's going on, so it gives a best guess. But it's not necessarily correct. We can solve this problem in a few different ways. Like I can do this. I can just change the outermost quotes just to be single quotes rather than having this particular one. I can just have single quote there as long as I respect the last one as well. Again, that'll be fine. Because recall from a moment ago, I said you could use double quotes or use single quotes so long as you're consistent. And that's fine. If I use single quotes on the outside, as I have there, then you can use double quotes on the inside of the string and you'll see them literally, a string literal. So for instance, if I now run again, Python of hello, there you can see hello friend in that case. But there's another way. Like if you insist on using double quotes as you might want to, like just to be consistent again, you might want to use that backslash character again. So we saw the backslash n just a moment ago, this, and that just meant that we don't want there to be a literal n on the output. We wanted a new line. So the backslash actually represents what's known as an escape character. An escape character is one where you can't just type in necessarily once on your keyboard. You need to express that with multiple characters. So I can actually go and put some multiple backslashes in front of my word friend. So let me just return back to, because I'm insisting I want to keep my double quotes on the outside as well. I like it. I'm going to keep it. But I'm going to then put here. So the computer realizes, oh, wait a minute, that these quotes aren't necessarily the start or the finish of a thought, like the literal quotes. Is that right? Oh, okay. So it has to go on the inside. Is that right? There you go. If I run that again. Okay. So again, just escaping is a good idea in general. That allows us to do that as well. All right. So let me go back just to our old example. I'll rewind to what we had before. Again, uncommenting this out because I left off with my code. I didn't necessarily want to delete it. Again, I'm just undoing all that commenting because I want to get back to the point ultimately of now specifying like a final way to solve the problem. It turns out that we have another way that we can solve the problem. And this is perhaps more frequently done now, or at least, a more elegant way as it comes to setting up us for the longer longer use of strings more generally, which is to use a newer feature of Python that allows us to do this thing called formatting strings. So I can put, if I just go back to this, literally not just hello name, I can like not the name of the variable like you see in your string, because we already say like this is wrong, right? Like if I do this, it's literally just going to be, it doesn't matter. It's just going to be like hello, comma, name. Instead of doing that, what if I do this? What if I instead decide on using these curly braces, these kind of curly brackets, which is a way around the variable's name. So I'm focusing on this particular thing called an F string now. So what if I put a curly bracket here and there, and notice that, well, it should then become something else. If I now run the program again, because I'm not done yet, Python of hello. Oops, daisy. All right. Yeah, so this is that's fine. Okay, well, obviously that's not what I want. But because I need to tell Python that this is a special kind of string. Like right now, it's tracking everything else like it's literally a string. This is what you're going to see in some circles as an F string. So as a format string or F string in Python. So it's a relatively new feature of Python that came about in some years not too far. And that's a way to format stuff in a string that's a special, like basically just the symbol. Like, and this is a bit weird, I know. The way that you would do this is with the character F. That's just what the world chose. So if you put an F at the beginning of a string, like this, right before the first quotation mark there, like before the word hello, that's a clue to Python that says, oh, okay, this is going to be a special string. Let me format this in a special way for you. Let me now go and do that. If I rerun the program, F, and notice how that changes already the color. It's recognized this. It's realized what is going on. So save up. So MARCO, press enter, and notice now I've got the goal what I've been trying to do the whole time of hello, Marco, like this. Now that's then being able to take it in. See, we don't start it this way because I like to think that if we did start it this way first, like you'll be like, well, why are we doing this? Why are all these magical symbols in place? Why do we have this F at all? But I think this is just another way to solve the same problem. Let me propose then that there is another way for you to solve things with strings. And it turns out that we've been doing some relatively simple operations on there. We've actually been trusting that the user is going to be good in corporate, and that is to say that they're actually going to type in whatever we want to type in. And just because they say like they type in a string, it doesn't necessarily is going to look the way that we want it to. You and I honestly, as humans are usually in the habit of websites and apps and the like, just accidentally hitting the spacebar a lot. Either at the beginning of the input or the end, maybe because the spacebar tends to be so big on the keyboard. It's pretty common just to get accidental spaces before or after some user's input. You and I are definitely in the habit of not necessarily capitalizing words like we should as well. If you're sending text messages, probably a little, sometimes quick and just setting everything in lowercase, for instance, and that's your style. If your phone's not fixing it for you, maybe like a very formal letter, you would capitalize things properly. But you and I as humans, just to get things going, we can't really be trusted to type letters by letters in a nice way necessarily when you're using some piece of software. Be it an app, be it a website, be it something else entirely. Don't trust your users. That's a good life practice. It turns out then that strings themselves come with a lot of built-in functionality. And you can see that, again, all in the documentation if you want to. This kind of string data type that we've been talking about a lot comes with its own functionality. That means that we can, does it have its own page? Yeah, that we can actually clean it up, or then we can reformat it in such a way that it looks a bit better for use. So, let's go and do that. Let's go back to my code here. And just to demonstrate what might happen if a user does incorporate, if we've got a bad person, if I then run, again, Python of hello.py, hit enter, and now let me just sloppily hit the spacebar a few too many times. Why? I wasn't paying attention, I was grabbing a drink, I was doing whatever, and now I'm going to type in the word Marco, and I don't know, I didn't realize my keyboard might be broken. I hit a couple more spacebars in between. Like, it's kind of a mess. It's all lowercase, it's all, it's all kind of all over the place. Maybe I just haven't been as careful with it. Now, that's not necessarily going to look grammatically right, It's kind of, it's a bit like that. Yeah, it's got spaces here, it's got, the program's not going to print out exactly that, and it looks really bad. At least for, trying to prioritize aesthetics and grammar, like why there's so many spaces now after the comma as well. Why is that in place? It's just not a very good way to get out of your users. But we can clean this up, because it turns out that built into the strings, which again, like it's the data type, so to speak, the type of data that Python is the ability to actually do things to that string. So let me go and do this. If I actually go ahead and type in something like this. So I'm going to say name equals name.strip. Okay. What does this do? So, okay, remove the white space from store and capitalize user's input. What do I mean by this? Well, okay, so on the right hand side, like I've got the user's name that's going to be coming through, whatever that is, and I'm going to be writing that to the variable called name. And then I've used a dot, like a full stop there. And then I seem to be doing what's another function, right? Like, weird, because every time we've seen a function thus far, like we see the function's name kind of on the left, print or input or something like this, and then usually followed then by parenthesis in yellow. And then another parenthesis, just to kind of finish. Well, that's exactly what I'm seeing here again. But what I'm doing is I'm using this particular function, again called strip, a little bit differently. Technically, this function is, in this context, called a method. It's called a method. What do I mean by that? Because if the name is a string, aka like str, well, it turns out, again, according to the documentation, there's a lot of functions that come with strings in Python, and you can then access that functionality by using the name of the string, like literally the name here, then a full stop, and then the name of the extra function, and then an open and close parenthesis, after which, maybe optionally some arguments inside this parenthesis also. In this case, Doesn't need any arguments. That's fine. I just want to strip down the space from the left of the name and from the right of the name. But that's not enough. Like I also want to remember that I've also stripped down the white space from the left and the right. So I need to then use that equal sign here again. And notice that just like before on line 2, this doesn't necessarily mean equality. This equal sign means assignment. I'm going to assign whatever the right value is from right to left. So when this line of code F4 runs, okay, name.strip, that returns to me, aka a return value. And it's going to return to me the same thing what that user typed in, but with, thanks to the strip function, no more space to the left or to the right. And so then the equal sign operator here, that's just going to copy that return value from the right over to the left, thereby updating at line 4 the value inside of my name variable, so that you can not only assign values to variables, you can absolutely change a value of a variable, hence the name a variable, because it can vary. The value inside of a variable can be chopped and changed just by using, again, the assignment operator. So equal sign again, and again, and again, and again. It will just keep copying whatever's on the right to whatever's the new value should then be stored as on the left. Okay, so if I then type in one more time to my CLI at the bottom, so python of hello.py, I have, I'm just going to type in space, Marco, space, enter. Much better. Okay, so it hasn't fixed my capitalization. So I'm still being a little bit sloppy with the first M, but it has at least stripped off all that extra space that used to happen, on the left and the right. Super minor detail, right? Like this isn't all that exciting, but it just speaks to the power of what you can do with a single line of code. So what else can I do here? Like, well, what if I could capitalize that user's input, the first letter? Let me go ahead and do this then. So I'm going to now, I'm just going to make a new line and say, let's capitalize the user's input. So one more time, it turns out that I could use another function here called name capitalize. Name.title. Okay, so let me just go ahead and capitalize the user's name. So if I were to say name equals name.capitalize, and it's with Z because of the American one. Okay, close and close. I'm just going to put comments there just to, so that there's no one right way of doing comments, but that's a way of just doing this, okay? Let's say to remove trailing and preceding white spaces before user input, okay? So I hope that makes sense. Basically just some short English phrase just to remind myself of what I'm doing, what's going on there. Cool, let's save this up. If I now go back to my code, and you know what, I think it's a bit easier if I grab this terminal. I know there's a way of, not that, like I want to have it to one side. Again, this is probably really simple. Just can't remember how to do it. It's called split code. That's it. Yes. How can I get my terminal in that window? Split terminal? Nope. That does what I didn't want it to do. Sorry, folks. I'm rather than messing about, there must be a way. Just can't figure it out. But okay, so if I just run this anyway, so python of hello.py, press enter one more time, my name. Okay. Oh, sorry. What I was doing was my space, blah, 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 blah. Marco, space. So no matter how I typed my name in, it's looking prettier. It is like, no matter how I type my name in, even a bit sloppily with lowercase or uppercase, now I'm fixing this. All right, but let me try this now. I'm getting a bit curious now. How about this? If I rerun this one more time, so python of hello.py, and I say space, Marco Ball, because that's my second name, and I'll space, enter. Now, ironically, capitalize, what we thought here in line 8 was capable of, is clearly not capitalizing anything we want. Like, clearly it's capitalizing just the first letter. And I don't worry about that one so much, okay? Okay, so what's my name? Marco Ball. I've only managed to capitalize this one, not that. So it turns out that, again, there are other functions in Python that do come with strings. And if you poke again in the documentation, you'll find, through the URL, like, you're going to find another solution, namely by doing this one. It's called title. So actually, let's change this then to away from capitalize over to title, because that's another function that, you would only know this by looking at a book or reading the documentation, that this is a function that comes with strings called title that will do title-based capitalization. So, capitalize the first letter of each word. So do a bit more work for us. So let's go ahead and run that one more time. Space, Marco, space, ball, space. Okay, cool. Now, well, I can't get around that issue so much. Well, I can, but just as an aside, like I'm kind of tired now of typing out Python all the time. When using a command line interface, and this is again true for Windows, Mac, or Linux, you can actually go back through all your old commands. So what I did just a moment ago was actually just hit the up arrow, and that immediately goes back and goes through all the history of your commands that I've ever typed. So it's just a faster way for me to again repeat myself without having to type in everything again. So marker ball, space. Great, there you go. Now I've cleaned things up better. Cool. But what about my code? Like now that I've got these 12 lines of code now, 4 of which are going to be comments, 4 of which are actually code, do I really need this much? Not necessarily. Another thing I want to watch out for what I can do in Python, let me not bother by capitalizing the name separately. What I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this. And let me say, I'm going to remove the titling, the capitalization entirely, gone. And I'm going to put that at the beginning, or sorry, at the end of here. Now, what I'm able to do now is I can chain functions together, like I can add title to the end of this one at line 5. Now, what's happening is, well, again, with a line like code like this, you first focus on what's happening to the right of the equal sign. So what's happening over here, and then we'll get to the left in a second. So what's on the right of the equal sign is this line. Oops. I've definitely shifted that across. There you go. Rewind. So I'm going to go and get the name. So get the value of the name variable. So MARCO, in that case, whatever your name is. After which I'm then going to strip off the white space from the left and the right. That is then going to return a value. It's going to return MARCO BALL, but without any kind of white spaces to the left or to the right. What I then want to do is with the return value is I want Python to be able to uppercase it or title case it. That is, go through every word in that resulting string and then fix the first letter of that word. So the M or the B in that case, and so forth if I've got more names. And then, just to finish that thought, copy the whole thing there, then store that over to that on the left, which is the same name variable from earlier. Okay? Which, you know what? I can actually take this a step further still. This is crazy. Why don't we go ahead and actually do this if you really want? I can maybe get rid of all of this. Yeah. Just remove all of this entirely. And let me just write that in on that first line. So name equals input. And then what's your name? What's your name? Dot strip dot title like that. Yes. Okay. And like, I'll get to it in a second, but you've gone from 12 lines of code, whatever I had, to say reasonably,
You're missing some quotes, Marco, after what's your name?
That's right. I think with another one there. Oh, you're right. For a second, I thought it was there, but that's it. It's a lot nicer. It's a lot tighter. And even though reasonable people might disagree, it's arguably just better now because it's just easy to read. Fewer lines of code, fewer opportunities for you to go off and make mistakes, but it just allows you to move on with the next problem to solve. How many functions can we combine this way? Technically as many as you want, but at some point your code is going to start to look really bad, right? Because this line of code is going to get really, really long if we keep adding and keep going on forever. It's eventually going to maybe wrap around to the next line and then maybe down again. So at some point you kind of just say, that's enough. That's too many. You start breaking up your code into multiple lines like I did, maybe reassigning that name variable as you need, maybe pass that on elsewhere. That's actually a good question because if I pivot that off to, what do you think? If I can maybe just tell you, pass it on to yourselves for a second, what would you stylistically say is a better way of doing this? All in one line or kind of spread out and chunked out across code blocks? What would you say is the way I've done now with the strip and the title kind of all in the same line? Better than my previous approach when I had, the name equals name.strip and then name equals name.title and so on. So if you think your previous version was better, where you had to, have everything broken out, just say no. And then we'll see why in just a moment. As I did say before, reasonable people will disagree. You'll say that that's absolutely the case here too, that doing one way or the other isn't necessarily the best, at least if you can justify things. Okay, so if I could just go back to my previous version, or rather just comment this out perhaps, because I don't necessarily need it right now. Why do you think maybe this is the best version or this current version of the code is better than our longer version of the code? Any thoughts, any intuition as to why that might be the case? And I'm just asking yourself, what do you think having this in the habit of reading from left to right might be better having everything in one go?
Well, it's not too long, so you can understand what's going on in a single line. It's therefore less overall text to read.
Less overall text to read. I think so. I would probably firmly put myself there. And a counterpoint though. So if you said no, if you actually prefer the other way, this then is just more to read in even though the sentence here, what's your name, is relatively short, this could get really ugly really quickly if you're going to ask a longer question of the user. And then that's going to make that line of code even longer, and therefore, less readable. It might be less obvious to kind of me, or just to,
But that's where your comments need to come in, isn't it? The documentation.
Yeah, I think in short, there's no right answer there. In fact, the process of just getting better at these things is getting your own sense of your own style of working. What your company might prescribe in that case, what's better in one way or the other, because you want ultimately everyone to be doing the same thing. If we were agreeing on comments, even people might disagree. Ultimately, though, so long as you have a pretty good argument in favor of one way or the other, ultimately that's what's more important. If you're just doing things because you don't actually know which one's better, that's not great. But if and when you start to acquire opinions about, this, and if you ask your friends, your colleagues, your friends, they challenge you and say, well, why would you do it this way or the other? They might not agree with you, but at least have an answer, or that should be enough, sufficiently persuasive as well. Because strings, they come with a whole bunch of other methods as well. Amongst which is another one here that we're going to see called split, like a banana split, which is, the name kind of suggests to kind of split a string into multiple smaller substrings, so to speak. Okay. Let me go ahead and do this. I know I'm looking at the time and there's not too much left, but if I can just go ahead and get between the lines, just to wrap up one last point, if I want to maybe split the name between, my two names. So in that case, I've got two. I want to do it in such a way that I can then split the name so that the first name and the last name are kind of treated separately. Again, so I'm going to say comment for good practice, split the user's name into first and last name. Okay, and then let's go ahead and actually take that name variable from before, which currently just contains something like presumably Mark in that case. And then I'm going to go ahead and call the method split, passing in the argument a single white space like that, thereby indicating here that I want to split on that one character. So it turns out then that split is actually going to return a sequence of values, ideally like a first name and then a last. And we can in Python actually assign both of those values from that sequence, at the same time at once to some variables. So if I do it like this, for instance, let's say first name, whoops, let me go here. So first, comma, last equals, and then that's going to have the effect then, again, from reading from right to left, putting the first such value, that whatever appears, as my first variable, and then the second such variable value is my second variable, and so on. So I think that then should work. Now, if I then go to my last line of code, I'm going to then print out, I'm going to go and say hello, but not to the user's first name. I just want to go and say hello, like Marco Ball. I just want to say hello, comma, remember those curly braces here, name, like this, like that. Perfect. Right then. So if I just go ahead and clear my terminal window, save this up, and if I hit save, Python of hello, y, I'm not going to do any, long training spaces again. Let me just do that one more time. Oops, daisy. So what's my name? Marco. But let me go and type in, say, Marco space Bull. Cross my fingers that it will run as usual. It didn't work. Why? Because of my script title. What's my name?
What's the wrong place?
Quote's the wrong place. This is one of those things where not entirely helpful. But it's not really title. So the problem lies in line 1.
You need brackets after strip as well as after title.
That could be it. Title again. Yeah, let's go and have a look. Hey, thank you. That's right. So it needs its own separate parentheses. Yeah, and that kind of figures because your method, your Python function here, should be able to at least optionally accept its own arguments in. And if I didn't give that a chance to, or rather collated that to the end, it would get confused. So there you go. Like I've been able to at least separate the two if I just want to print out, one or the other. Of course, like we've seen a lot of examples just involving strings, and certainly programming languages, they manipulate other types of data too as well. I would then go off and transition to talk about integers, but another very common example of that, which just more naturally comes about with Python when it comes to languages and kind of AI, machine learning. But I think maybe reserving this for another day. Just looking at the time, I don't really think it's fair to go into this as it is. Of course, like in the world of Python, there's a lot to it, but just getting the sprinkle of what is a program about is a good first step in just understanding what's out there. I was going to make a point and I forgot what I was going to say, which isn't helpful. Yeah, I mean, I suppose that all of this could just be sort of whisked away with AI tools, with coding tools and the like, if we have a quick look. For those in Pug cohort this weekend, I might, repeat myself then, because this is something I'll show you later, how you can use this sort of thing. But if I wanted to say, look, can you code me up? I'm going to take a suggestion from chat. Can someone please give me a game, like a text-based, like a retro arcade style game that you used to know or play? Hangman. A game of Hangman. And I'm going to ask you, David, to tell me if fruits or if something you like or anything at all that you want to contextualize the game of Hangman in. So make it like a themed Hangman. Doesn't have to be anything special. It could just be Hangman by itself. But what if I say like a cloud-themed Hangman? As if to tie back to AWS. Yeah. All right. We'll start with that and we'll see what it comes up with. Okay. So there you go. Like minimally, I have a boilerplate, like an example of a first draft, which is what Q is able to draft up for me. It needs permissions to modify lines. That's fine. So it's asking me, can I create a new file? Notice here the Py file extension. It doesn't exist. So it's going to now create 61 new lines of such a thing. And it gives me a bit of a large language model response on that as well. Such as if I now pull this up, I don't need to look there anymore. Get rid of that pen. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. Let me do it within a new file, just to not mess things up. New Python file, and I'm just going to say, I know there's a way to call, is it / or alt / I can't remember how it's done. Bear with me. How to inline call on Q in VS Code. I think it's alt and something. Oh, so Control L. Okay. Control L? Absolutely not. Control I, maybe. Okay. So can you, I'll just copy and paste. Control I. And now this way, at least it does so in the same file rather than having to worry about directories. Yeah. Okay. So now there's much more on screen that we've not yet talked of: modules, import functions, dictionaries and lists, and other data types too that accept multiple kind of values. But at least you get a good sense of some of these things. You know, we talked about methods, we talked about return values and carriage statements, and ASCII art, which can be done just by collating their strings. So clearly, this is a really good start, which would take me a while, if never getting it as nicely as this, just to be able to come up with a my idea to put into practice. I'm not here to praise, again, AI. I think that kind of sells itself at this point. We all know what it is and what it's there for, but be ahead of the tools that you use. When you're prescribing things, it's always good to know why. And that comes with actual, dirting and fingernails, having uses and having experiments with such a thing, if not just to fix them and be able to solve it on the spot, but to be at least speaking a common language with whatever's, whatever people are throwing out there. So full stack, full end development, front and back developments, middleware, it always going to use at some lower level, the web, the language of the web, HTML and HTTP and all those headers of the like. But at some point, a programming language is going to be interfacing all of these things too. Now, depending on what job we end up doing, and that is a really big depends, it's still minimally good, I think, to be ahead of the curve and be familiar with the tools that you work with. I'm not here to say, spend a lifetime, don't learn to code, learn how to think programmatically, learn how to think algorithmically, because I can prove to you that this is a much better coder than I ever am. And proof, in the pudding, A or M, it didn't work. A, R, oh, yeah, there's an R. M, what could that be? Anyone want to suggest a letter? Give me a suggestion if you want a letter. Let's go for an E, go for the vowels. E comes up. So E is at the end, as well as that character. We've got 5 left. Anyway, keep going. I'll do whatever you want me to. So here, that discussion about not accepting what user inputs come in. Maybe if I put like a whole phrase or like perhaps an integer when they should be expecting a variable, a string, that might break. I'll just go and fill in a couple more. I say D, for example. C says Dennis. C comes up. Still, yeah, 4 lives left. I honestly have no idea. A should have started with A. A doesn't come up. There's no A. Anything else? So A, we've done E, we've done I. Yeah, let's go for the vowels.
It's microservice, my guess.
O, S, B. Ta-da! Okay, well done. Nice. So again, this would be a lot easier to do with today's tools. You don't have to be like an organic chemistry major in order to understand how to drive a car, right? You don't need to know how petrol works to be able to drive a car. The same way that you don't need to necessarily understand the low-level implementation details of a Python program just to kind of run with them with application code and software more generally. But I still think it's worth just to take a look underneath the hood, if not for a newfound awareness or an appreciation of the tools running the web and the internet more broadly. I'll leave it for you with what we've got going on. I know Fridays are usually a wild card. It has been up for debate as to who can take them. I'll feedback if there's anything that can be done more towards a Python end. Happy to lead those sessions, but I don't want to go into any more detail this evening tonight. What's more is, again, I'm probably jarring on you after a while. There are many other tools that are better at teaching Python skills in that case. I'll love you and leave you, folks. I want to say thank you again for this evening. It's been fun. I know that there's a lot more still to be said, but tune in next week and we'll take it from there.